Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're undertaking a monumental task.
We really are.
A listener has asked us for a surgical deep dive into the foundational blueprint for spiritual training, leveraging one of the richest collections of ancient wisdom out there, the teachings of the Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, we're going to be working directly from the sources found in the Majjhima Nikāya, or the middle-length Discourses.
And these texts, they aren't just historical documents. They are absolutely central to the Theravada tradition globally.
Right.
If you really want to understand the true architecture of the Buddhist path, not just the simple summary you might read in a general book, but the actual structural beams, the plumbing, the detailed floor plans, the Majjhima Nikāya is where you have to go. It's dense, absolutely, but it's so illuminating.
So our mission today is to move beyond just a simple summary. We're going to try and extract the essential framework of the path, the actual sequence of training. Exactly, the how. We want to understand not just what the core doctrines are, but how they're dynamically presented, how they're applied in real-world situations, and how they lead, step by step to these stages of ultimate liberation. And we'll be using the specific and often surprisingly vivid dialogues from these original sources.
We're aiming for the deep, memorable nuggets.
Yes.
And the unique value here is that, well, while this collection covers core doctrine concepts you might find in other ancient texts, it delivers them through this fascinating procession of scenarios.
It's not a dry textbook.
Not at all. The Buddha is constantly shown using his skill in adapting his teachings to the needs and proclivities of his interlocutors. He's teaching everyone from skeptical kings to simple householders, and he's using wit, sometimes humor, but always with this profound compassion to tailor the path perfectly to the person standing right in front of them.
So the sources contain these key conversations and these detailed, almost step-by-step instructions on everything from meditation to managing conflict. It's really a complete handbook.
Exactly. It's an applied manual.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the context. Where did these teachings come from? For a tradition that emphasizes personal verification and freedom, what kind of authority did the founder actually establish?
Well, the sources immediately established the Buddha's role as someone who commanded just unparalleled respect.
Right.
He's frequently ascribed the title of the incomparable leader of persons to be tamed, the teacher of gods and humans. So that suggests the figure whose authority really transcends human limitations.
And when we read about ancient spiritual leaders, we often assume that kind of authority demands absolute, just unquestioning faith from the disciples.
That's the default assumption.
But our sources seem to reveal something far more radical, almost a modern approach to epistemology that just completely contradicts that.
It's the single most fascinating detail about his method, I think.
Right.
He established his spiritual authority, but then he instantly balanced it with this radical invitation for self-investigation and reasoned doubt. He rejected the entire premise of dogmatic inherited authority.
How does that actually show up in the texts?
We find this powerfully illustrated in a source known as the Vansaka Sutta, the Inquirer.
The Inquirer.
Yes, and in this discourse, the Buddha explicitly invites the bhikkhus, his fully committed monks and nuns, to make a thorough investigation of himself, the teacher.
Wait, hold on. He told his most devoted followers to investigate whether he was truly enlightened. That's an astonishing command. Why wouldn't they just accept it?
Because the entire path is built on the foundation of seeing reality as it truly is, not as you wish it to be, or as you're told it is.
I see.
The purpose of this investigation was to determine whether he could genuinely be accepted as fully enlightened. I mean, think about it. If the teacher is a fraud, the path is useless.
So the whole thing is based on verifiable results, not just blind belief. The idea is if the student follows the instructions and actually achieves the promised results, a decrease in suffering, an increase in inner peace, then that verification becomes the source of confidence in the teacher.
Absolutely. He wasn't asking for faith in the sense of a blind leap of trust. He was establishing confidence sada, that is, rooted in vision, firm, and therefore invincible against any counter-argument or philosophical challenge. You verify the method through your own experience, and that verification strengthens your confidence in the person who gave you the method. It sets the standard right away. This is a path based on reasoning, on experimentation, and personal verification.
And this emphasis on self-verification and the integrity of the teaching, it extended beyond the Buddha himself, right? Which is crucial for the survival of any tradition. The Majjhima Nikāya isn't a monologue. It features several discourses delivered by his accomplished disciples.
This is key. It's so key because it demonstrates the continuity and the resilience of the teaching. It wasn't some proprietary knowledge that just vanished when the founder passed away. The wisdom was distributed.
Let's look at some of the major intellectual architects that are featured in these texts.
Well, first and foremost, you have to talk about Venerable Sariputta. He was often reverently called the General of the Dhamma.
The General of the Dhamma.
He was the intellectual force of the early Sangha, the community. He's credited with attaining mastery and perfection in noble virtue, concentration, wisdom, and deliverance.
And he didn't just practice, he was a teacher.
Precisely. He delivered 9 suttas in the Majjhima Nikāya alone, some of which are considered basic texts for advanced doctrine study even today. He was the one who could break down the really complex, subtle points of analysis.
So, if the Buddha was the revolutionary founder, Sariputta was kind of the master systematizer.
That's a great way to put it. Then you have Venerable Ananda, who was the Buddha's personal attendant for the last 25 years of his life. He delivered 7 suttas. Ananda was the repository of memory. He was the one who heard everything.
And then crucially, we have Venerable Mahakaccana, who specialized in filling in the blanks.
The great elaborator, yes. We see an instance in the sources where the Buddha gives a very brief, sort of enigmatic summary, profound but very terse statement, and then he just leaves.
And the monks are left scratching their heads.
Right. The bhikkhus realized they understood the spirit of it, but they lacked the detailed application. So they turned to Mahakaccana.
They recognize the master is vision, he is knowledge, he is the Dhamma, but they trust Mahakaccana's ability to expound on the detailed meaning.
And that interaction shows the vitality of the community. The students aren't passive listeners. They're actively seeking clarification, and they recognize that wisdom isn't completely centralized. Mahakaccana excels in elaborating on these brief sayings, which shows that the core teaching is robust enough to be transmitted and explained by those who have realized it.
And it's so important to note that this capacity for spiritual realization and explanation was not limited by gender. We see the role of female disciples highlighted very prominently in these texts.
Absolutely. Bhikkhuni Dhammadinna features in a dialogue where she gives these incredibly astute replies to probing complex philosophical questions about the nature of the path.
And her replies were so precise that the Buddha later confirmed her teaching, right?
He did. He stated he would have explained the matter in the same way. And this just illustrates the full confidence in the spiritual capacity and the explanatory power of his female disciples. It validates their authority to teach the profound Dhamma.
Okay, moving on from these impressive figures, let's tackle the central concept that binds all these teachings together, Dhamma. This one Pali word carries such enormous weight, and I know our sources highlight just how complex it is to translate.
The Pali word Dhamma is one of the most conceptually rich and frankly frustrating words to translate in these texts. It can mean so many different things depending on the context. The translator of our sources made a very deliberate choice to only retain the Pali word Dhamma when referring specifically to the Buddha's teaching, the path, the doctrine, or when referencing a rival teaching.
So when we talk about spiritual training, that's Dhamma. But when the word is used in a non-doctrinal context, how is it rendered?
Well, if the word is used as a general ontological reference term in the plural, referring to basically everything in existence, all compounded things, it's rendered simply as things.
Okay, that's straightforward enough.
But then it gets technical. When it takes on a more specific nuance, referring to the fundamental momentary phenomena of existence, or the basic mental constituents like thoughts, sensations, perceptions, it's rendered as states.
And that distinction between things and states is so essential for the listener. And the source reminds us that these states aren't static entities, are they? They're dynamic events in a constant flux.
Exactly. That's the core philosophical premise, that these states are constantly arising and passing away. They do not refer to some persisting entity or a permanent soul that undergoes these states. The whole goal of insight is to see that they are just a flow of dynamic events.
And seeing that flow leads directly to the core teaching about intellectual attachment. Even if you hold the most accurate, purified view of reality, the act of clinging to that view is still a form of suffering. This is where the famous simile of the raft comes in.
The simile of the raft is fundamental because it just cuts across the academic desire to intellectualize the teaching. You build a raft, the Dhamma, the precepts, the views, the practices, to cross the turbulent river of suffering. Once you are across, you're on the shore of liberation, of Nibbana.
You've achieved the goal.
Right. But if you then cherish the raft, if you hold on to it, carry it on your back, or treat it as a possession, you have missed the entire point. The source material is explicit. Even purified and bright views must not be adhered to, cherished, treasured, or treated as a possession.
Because the Dhamma is taught for the purpose of crossing over, not for the purpose of grasping. Clinging is the engine of suffering, even if you are clinging to the correct spiritual tool. That's just a profound lesson in non-attachment to concepts.
It truly is. The teaching liberates you from concepts. But if you treat the concept of liberation as a possession, you haven't been liberated at all.
That sets us up perfectly to understand the colossal cosmic problem the Dhamma is designed to solve. This ceaseless cycle of existence and suffering, known as samsara. Let's start by analyzing the mechanism of bondage, how we get trapped through the chain of dependent origination.
The chain of dependent origination defines the core mechanism that keeps us bound. It's a structure of conditionality. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. It's a closed feedback loop that just generates misery.
It's not a list of unrelated steps, it's a living, breathing, moment-to-moment process of conditioning. And the bhikkhus summarized this mechanism in a backward sequence, tracing suffering back to its origin.
Yes, and this backward analysis is often the most illuminating. It starts with the deepest root, ignorance. Ignorance of the Four Noble Truths is the necessary condition for formations. These are the mental, verbal, and bodily volitional actions, or sakkharas.
So our unawareness drives our basic impulses and intentions.
Exactly. And these intentional formations, in turn, are the condition for consciousness. Consciousness then conditions what's called mentality materiality, our physical and mental structure.
Yeah.
Mentality materiality then conditions the sixfold base, which is basically our apparatus for interaction. The 5 sense organs plus the mind.
Okay, so intention creates the raw consciousness, which molds the basic human vehicle, which then equips itself with sense organs. What happens when those sense organs engage with the world?
Well, the sixfold base conditions contact, and contact conditions feeling, whether it's pleasant, painful, or neutral. And this is where the machine really accelerates.
Right, this is the critical pivot point, where the abstract philosophical mechanism becomes an immediate psychological process we experience every single second.
Feeling is the necessary condition for craving, or tanta. You feel something pleasant, you crave more. You feel something painful, you crave its absence. This craving, in turn, conditions clinging or grasping, and clinging conditions being existence itself or bhava.
And existence, whether in this moment or cosmologically, leads inevitably to the consequences we're trying to escape.
Being conditions birth. And the sources conclude so powerfully. Birth is the condition for aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. This completes the loop and perfectly summarizes the origin of this whole mass of suffering. It's an unbroken chain.
I often hear people ask, if the whole chain is dependent, where's the free will? Isn't this just fate?
That's a crucial question. This framework shows that suffering is an automatic feedback loop, yes, but it is driven by intentional action. Karma is not fate. Karma means action, and it dictates the quality and the location of this ceaseless cycle. The free will lies in that moment you observe feeling and choose not to let it condition craving.
So the mechanism continues automatically until we introduce the element of mindfulness and wisdom to break that link between feeling and craving.
Precisely. And the quality of our actions, our karma, is paramount because it dictates our present state and our future rebirth. Good actions, motivated by non-greed, non-hate, and non-delusion, they lead to higher states, happiness, good fortune. But bad actions, motivated by greed, hate, and delusion, they lead to lower states, pain, misfortune.
And the sources confirm that the gravity of these intentions accounts for differences in the mode of rebirth. To illustrate the vastness of this law's reach, the sources provide a whole cosmological geography, the 31 planes of existence.
This cosmological overview maps where the results of our karma manifest. The primary realm, where most conditioned life happens, is the sense sphere realm, which consists of 11 planes dominated by sensual desire, both good and bad.
Let's briefly anchor ourselves in the geography of suffering, the bad destinations, or apaya.
The sources detail 4 apaya. The hells are described with visceral precision in discourses like the Devadatta Sutta. These aren't eternal hells, but they are states of intense torment, where beings feel painful, racking, piercing feelings for vast periods of time. The torment continues until the evil action that caused the rebirth has exhausted its result.
They sort of pay the debt, so to speak.
Exactly. Then you have the animal kingdom, the sphere of ghosts, Peta, who are afflicted with this incessant hunger and thirst, a terrifying depiction of intense, unfulfilled craving, and then the sphere of titans, asuras, who are involved in constant combat and rivalry.
And moving upward through the sense sphere, we find the human world and then the 6 heavenly planes.
These are realms of increased happiness, but they're still temporary. They include the gods of the 33 and the descent to heaven, which is famous as the abode of the Bodhisattva before his final birth as the historical Buddha.
And there's a surprising celestial tenet here as well, isn't there?
Indeed. The highest plane in the sense sphere is the abode of Mara, the tempter. He's viewed as a powerful deity who is intensely keen to prevent beings from escaping the net of samsara. His existence just underscores that even in the upper reaches of conditioned existence, there is a force that represents attachment and resistance to liberation.
And finally, we briefly mentioned the fine material and immaterial realms.
These are highly refined realms, far beyond sensual desire. They're reached exclusively through the mastery of high-level serenity meditation, the jhanas, and the 4 immaterial states. They offer blissful, immensely long-lasting rebirths, but they're still temporary and conditioned, which is why the Buddha rejected them as the final goal. They just offer a sublime form of procrastination.
So the ultimate prison, then, is the mind's attachment to the idea of I or mine. If the entire cycle is driven by craving and clinging, we need to understand the cognitive error that sustains them. This leads us to the concept of conceiving and the identity view.
This is the intellectual and psychological core of suffering. The sources explain that craving and clinging are sustained by conceivings, manyita. And these aren't just thoughts. They are deeply ingrained, diluted views, self-referential conceits, and suppositions.
And they aren't generated passively. They're fabricated.
They are fabricated by an internal process of mental commentary known as proliferation, or papanyaka. Think of it as the mind constantly narrating, evaluating, judging, and creating a story about everything it experiences. This commentary is then projected onto the world as having objective validity, when in fact it's just noise generated by attachment.
It's not just attachment to the car. It's attachment to the idea that I am the owner of the car or I am successful because of the car. It's that self-referential view that locks us in.
The first siddha, MN1, in particular, provides the precise anatomy of this misunderstanding. It states that the untaught person fails to fully understand the world, specifically the seen, heard, sensed, or cognized. And crucially, they even fail to understand nibbana itself, and can therefore conceive of it in a diluted way.
What does that structural failure look like in practice? How does the mind actually fabricate the self-view?
It manifests in 5 distinct ways of conceiving in relation to any object. Let's just call it X.
Okay.
1. The person conceives himself as X. So I am this body, I am this job.
Right.
2. The person conceives himself in X. Myself resides in this state of mind or in this sense of success.
Yeah, see.
3. The person conceives himself apart from X. I am superior to or separate from this experience of pain. 4. The person conceives X to be mine. This is my feeling, my past, my future. And finally, 5. The person delights in X.
So whether the object is physical or mental or even existential, the mind uses those 5 structures to establish an artificial fixed identity. It's a mechanism of ownership.
It is the delusion of permanence in a world of flux. And the ultimate sorrow arises when a person holds this rigid view of a permanent self, an everlasting identity, and then confronts the teaching of cessation.
MN22 described that agitation so beautifully.
It does. When the person who holds the view that after death I shall be permanent, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change, here's the Dhamma teaching cessation and nibbana, the end of all identity and rebirth, they think, so I shall be annihilated, so I shall perish, so I shall be no more. This is the source of profound sorrow and grief.
They mistake liberation for annihilation because their sense of existence is so tightly bound up in their identity view.
Exactly. But the noble disciple, who is free from the view of self, having seen the 5 aggregates as not self, experiences no such sorrow or grief at the prospect of nibbana. They don't have an I to be annihilated. The ultimate freedom, then, is seeing through these fabrications, not acquiring a better view, but abandoning the mechanism of viewing itself.
Now that we understand the problem suffering and its mechanism craving rooted in the delusion of self, let's pivot to the solution, the practice. This is not a philosophy, it's an applied spiritual science.
The practice is rigorously structured as a gradual training. It's laid out in 2 essential stages. The first is the mundane stage, or the preparatory path, lokiya. This is what builds the necessary mental and ethical muscle.
And the preparatory stage is what we know as the threefold path.
Correct. Virtue, sila, concentration, samadhi, and wisdom, panya. These build a foundation. The second stage is the supramundane stage, lokuttara, or the consummate path. This is the realized, irreversible path that leads directly and infallibly out of the world to Nibbana.
Within the practice, there are these dual systems of meditation, which need clarification because I think they often get conflated. We have samatha and vipassana.
They have distinct aims, but they work together. The first is serenity, or samatha. Its aim is perfect concentration, samadhi, which unifies and calms the mind, suppressing the 5 hindrances, like sensual desire and ill will.
And this leads to these deep states of absorption.
It leads to the 8 absorptions. First, the 4 jhanas, which are levels of concentration marked by profound stillness and pleasure. And beyond those, the 4 immaterial states, infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. These are incredibly refined mental attainments.
But the sources are clear that these are not liberation itself.
This is a vital piece of context. The sources clarify that the Buddha himself, before his enlightenment, mastered the 2 highest stages under his early teachers, but he realized they were a dead end for final liberation. They only led to higher planes of rebirth, temporary relief in a fine material or immaterial realm, but not to the uprooting of ignorance.
So serenity creates an ideal mental state, but it doesn't actually solve the core problem of identity view.
Exactly. The unification of the mind achieved through concentration is a crucial foundation, a pleasant abiding here and now. But it's only a means, not the end. The mind must be unified and calmed before it can see clearly.
What are some of the practical serenity techniques mentioned in the sources that can induce these jhanas?
Well, we find specific techniques like the 10 kasiyas meditation devices, often discs or circles used to fix concentration. There are also the 4 divine abodes, or Brahmavihara: boundless loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. These practices cultivate wholesome states that displace hate and ill will, preparing the mind for stability.
So serenity stabilizes the mind, but it's the second system that provides the decisive blow against ignorance, insight, or vipassana.
Insight is the crucial, irreplaceable instrument needed to uproot ignorance and achieve ultimate wisdom, panya. Unlike serenity, which focuses on a single, uniform object to induce stability, insight meditation endeavors to contemplate, from a position of detached observation, the ever-shifting flux of experience itself.
So instead of looking at a color disk to achieve calm, you're looking at the raw input of the senses and the mental processes themselves.
Precisely. You pierce through the entire conceptual net of projections and enable the meditator to directly penetrate the 3 characteristics of existence: impermanence, suffering, and not self. You see that everything is changing, therefore everything is ultimately unsatisfactory, and therefore none of it can be claimed as I or mine.
Let's delve into the practical instructions the Buddha gave to cultivate this insight. He provided detailed, almost visceral instructions for deconstructing our most tenacious attachment, the physical form.
This is a powerful technique illustrated in the contemplation of the earth element. The disciple is instructed to systematically contemplate the body as the internal earth element, meaning everything's solid and solidified, everything that is clung to.
And the list is intentionally jarring, isn't it?
It is meant to shock the system out of its romanticized view of the body. The list runs through head hairs, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, intestines, stomach, feces, and so on.
Why such a graphic inventory? What's the purpose of that?
The purpose is clinical, not morbid. The meditator's goal is to recognize that this internal earth element, the body, and the external earth element, the ground, mountains, continents, are simply earth element. There is no qualitative difference between the dirt on the outside and the components on the inside.
And what is the profound, shattering insight gained from this comparison?
The crucial insight, which the meditator must see as it actually is with proper wisdom, is stated as, "This is not mine, this I am not. This is not myself." The source then adds context by observing that even the external earth element, great as it is seen to be impermanent, subject to destruction, disappearance, and change.
Right.
So if something as vast and seemingly solid as the external earth vanishes over time, how can this transient body, which lasts but a while, possibly be considered a permanent I or mine?
It weaponizes impermanence against the delusion of self. It takes the familiar object of self-love, the body, and just analyzes it into impersonal, transient components.
It moves beyond conceptual agreement to direct experiential realization of not self.
Let's turn now to the other core insight practice, mindfulness of breathing. The instructions here are incredibly systematic, detailing a progressive ascent through the stages of practice.
Mindfulness of breathing, or Anapanasati, is considered a complete path in itself. It's a practice that serves as a bridge, capable of being pursued through all four jhanas and then used directly to develop insight. The detailed instructions start with the foundational steps. The bhikkhu, seated in seclusion, breathes in long, understanding, I breathe in long, breathing out short, understand, I breathe out short.
Just simple awareness of the breath.
Yes, but it quickly deepens. The practice progresses to experiencing and tranquilizing the bodily formation, meaning bringing the physical body and breath rhythm to a state of profound calm. Then the focus shifts internally to the feeling states, experiencing rapture and pleasure, and then experiencing and tranquilizing the mental formation.
So this shows a mastery over not just the body, but the mind's reactions to sensory input.
Precisely. By stabilizing the body and controlling the rapture and pleasure, which can be distracting, the meditator prepares the ground for pure insight. The pinnacle of this mindfulness, where insight truly begins, is in the final stages.
Which are?
Training to breathe in and out while contemplating impermanence, contemplating fading away, contemplating cessation, and contemplating relinquishment. The practice moves from stabilizing the breath and body through cultivating wholesome mental states to applying radical insight directly to the moment-to-moment process of experience, that flow of states we discussed earlier.
The path clearly requires tremendous sustained self-control. The mind is turbulent, it's prone to straying. This leads us directly into the ethical struggle. How do you manage the mind when those unwholesome thoughts, greed, hate, delusion inevitably arise, especially in the midst of intensive practice?
The sources show that Buddha was intensely practical about this. He provided an incredibly specific 5-step method for dealing with and abandoning evil, unwholesome thoughts, detailed in the Vitakkasanthana Sutta. This isn't about just letting the thoughts play out. It's active psychological self-mastery.
This sounds almost like ancient cognitive therapy. Let's walk through this sequence. What's step 1?
Step 1 is substitution. When an unwholesome thought arises, the bhikkhu gives attention to another sign or object connected with what is wholesome. The simile used is that of a skilled carpenter knocking out, removing, and extracting a coarse peg by means of a fine one.
So if a thought of hatred arises, you actively replace it with a thought of loving kindness, deliberately driving out the old thought with a new, stronger, wholesome one.
That's the immediate psychological strategy. But if the unwholesome thoughts still arise, you move to step 2, examination of danger. The bhikkhu examines the danger inherent in those thoughts, recognizing that they are unwholesome, reprehensible, and resulting in suffering.
So this is a shift from simple replacement to deep-seated motivation, cultivating a kind of repulsion.
Yes, and the simile is powerful here. Imagine a young person who loves adornment, but someone forces the carcass of a snake or a dog or a human being around his or her neck. That young person would be horrified, humiliated, and disgusted. The evil thought must be seen as equally disgusting and existentially dangerous. That visceral repulsion provides the necessary motivation to reject it.
That seems like a powerful deterrent. But what if the thought is so tenacious, so ingrained, that even substitution and repulsion fail? What then?
Then we escalate to step 3, forgetting or ignoring. The bhikkhu simply tries to forget the thoughts, refusing to give them attention or mental space. The analogy is a man with good eyes who sees something unpleasant that have come within range and simply shuts his eyes or looks away. He starves the thought of the fuel of attention.
Right. This acknowledges that continued attention, even hostile attention, just fuels the thought. But what if the thought is less about content and more a general mental restlessness?
That's step 4, stilling the formation. The bhikkhu gives attention to stilling the very thought formation itself. The simile illustrates a gradual reduction of energy. A man who is walking fast. He recognizes this and decides to walk slowly, then stand still, then sit down, then finally lie down. He gradually substitutes a grosser, higher energy activity with a subtler, lower energy one, gradually calming the physical and mental drivers of the thought process itself.
So that seems to target the actual kinetics of the mind. And the final step is the most drastic.
The final step, used only when all else fails, is forceful suppression. This is the painful path. The bhikkhu subdues and crushes the mind with teeth clenched and tongue pressed against the palate.
That sounds like pure agonizing willpower. Why is this considered the last resort?
Because it's physically and mentally exhausting. The text refers to it as the painful path, requiring significant effort, and you can't maintain this state of forceful suppression indefinitely. However, the end result of all 5 techniques is the same. The unwholesome thoughts are abandoned, and the mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated.
This highlights that ethical purity isn't passive. It's a constant, zealous application of specialized psychological warfare against one's own habitual mental processes. And this necessity of zeal and self-awareness is further explored in Venerable Sariputta's analysis of the four kinds of persons.
Sariputta's taxonomy is profoundly insightful for self-assessment. He defines four types based on two factors: the presence of a blemish, so lust, hate, or delusion, and the understanding of that blemish. It's a diagnostic tool.
Let's focus on the crucial difference between the two blemish types, because that's where the ethical choice lies.
Right. The first is the blemished person who doesn't understand they have a blemish. This person is called inferior.
Yeah.
Because they're blind to their own flaw, they will not arouse zeal, make effort, or instigate energy to abandon that blemish, and they will inevitably die with a mind defiled.
And the simile for this reinforces that spiritual blindness.
It does. The analogy is a dirty bronze dish put away in a dusty corner, which only gets more stained and tarnished over time because it is never cleaned or utilized. This is the tragedy of complacent ignorance.
Now contrast that with the superior practitioner.
That's the blemished person who understands their blemish. This person is called superior. Because they recognize the flaw, the lust, the hate, the delusion, they will arouse zeal, make effort, and instigate energy to abandon that blemish, and they will die with a mind undefiled.
So the difference is not the presence of the flaw, but the application of zeal to purify it.
Precisely. The simile here is a dirty bronze dish that is regularly used and cleaned. Because it is actively purified, it becomes cleaner and brighter later on. The core message is that self-awareness combined with energetic application is what defines the superior practitioner. It's not about being flawless. It's about knowing your flaws and working diligently on them.
This intense ethical training culminates in the capacity for supreme endurance, which is necessary when dealing with external hostility. The simile of the saw presents the ultimate ethical challenge.
The simile of the saw is one of the most extreme instructions in the sources, designed to establish an absolute standard of non-reaction. The teaching addresses how to endure severe provocation and hostility. The Buddha warns that even if bandits were to sever you savagely limb by limb with a two-handled saw, you must not give rise to a mind of hate toward them.
That standard is almost incomprehensible for someone caught in the human instinct for self-preservation and revenge. How do you possibly achieve that state?
The training is utterly internal. The required practice in that moment is to train the mind to remain utterly unaffected, neither returning harm nor uttering any evil words. Instead, you must abide with boundless loving-kindness, brahmavihara, towards the aggressor, pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind without hostility and without ill will.
So the ultimate ethical defense is not retaliation, but an unbreakable, internally cultivated state of peace that extends even toward your aggressor.
It's the highest form of self-mastery. And the sources make it clear this training applies even to far lesser offenses, such as the 5 courses of speech. Others may address you in timely or untimely, true or untrue, gentle or harsh ways. And in all cases, the training is simply to endure these things with an unaffected, non-reactive mind. This ethical armor is essential to maintain the mental stability needed for deep insight.
Okay, we've established the foundation of virtue, concentration, and the strenuous application of insight. We now arrive at the culmination, the final goal of liberation and the supramundane path, which is structured around these irreversible breakthroughs.
Progress is marked by 4 major breakthroughs, commonly known as the 4 planes of liberation, each defined by the systematic elimination of the 10 fetters, sayojana, that bind beings to the cycle of rebirth.
Let's start with the first and most decisive step, the point of no return.
That is the path and fruit of stream entry, or sotapanna. This is the irreversible entry into the Noble Eightfold Path. Achieving this means you have eliminated the 3 grossest fetters.
And those 3 fetters are?
They are: 1, identity of you seeing a permanent self among the aggregates; 2, doubt in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha; and 3, adherence to external rules or rituals, believing they alone bring purification without realizing the need for insight.
The result of stream entry is this profound certainty built upon that initial verification we discussed right at the start.
Yes, certainty of the goal. The stream enter is bound to reach final liberation in a maximum of 7 more births, and only in human or heavenly realms. They're safe from the lower, miserable realms. The sources also clarify that this can be achieved either as a Dhamma follower, where wisdom is dominant, or a faith follower, where faith is dominant, showing different psychological profiles can reach the same initial stage of safety.
The next stage involves actively weakening the fundamental defilements.
That's the path and fruit of the once returner, or Sakadagamin. This individual significantly attenuates, weakens the root defilements of lust, hate, and delusion. They haven't eliminated them, but they are no longer these overwhelming forces. The result is simple. They return only once more to this world to make a final end of suffering.
Then we have the breakthrough, where the disciple achieves such purity they never need to return to the human realm at all.
That is the path and fruit of the non-returner, the Anagamman. This stage achieves a massive cleansing, the elimination of the 5 lower fetters entirely. These include the first 3, plus sensual desire and ill will, the root of hatred.
What happens to the non-returner then?
Their fate is fixed. They are due to reappear spontaneously in the pure abodes, which are higher celestial realms of contemplation, and they attain final nibbana there without ever returning from that world. They have permanently escaped the sense sphere.
And finally, the ultimate stage, the arahant.
The path and fruit of the arahant eliminates all 10 fetters, including the remaining 5 higher fetters like craving for fine material or immaterial existence, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance. They achieve deliverance of mind and deliverance by wisdom that are taintless with the destruction of the taints.
And the arahant is defined by their final realization. Birth is destroyed, the holy life is lived, what had to be done has been done, there is no more coming to any state of being.
And this realization is coupled with profound knowledge, often described in terms of the 10 Tathagata's powers. These aren't superpowers in a comic book sense, but rather a complete knowledge of causal relations.
What are some of those key powers that define the arahant's insight?
Well, they include the power of recollecting manifold past lives with all their aspects and particulars. Crucially, they possess the divine eye, purified and surpassing the human, used to see other beings passing away and reappearing according to their actions. This confirms the cosmological geography and the law of karma through direct vision.
Speaking of the arahant's knowledge, the sources include a fascinating detail about the continuous nature of their liberation, using the simile of the amputated limbs. This is important because it checks a potential misconception about enlightenment.
It absolutely does. The misconception is that the arahant must be in a constant, uninterrupted state of conscious bliss or continuous review of their freedom. In one of the suttas, a wanderer named Sandakai asks Venerable Ananda if the arahant's knowledge and vision that their taints are destroyed is continuously and uninterruptedly present, whether they are walking, standing, or sleeping.
And the answer is complex.
It is a decisive no, it is not continuous. Ananda uses the simile of a man whose hands and feet have been permanently cut off. The hands and feet are continuously cut off, whether he is walking or sleeping, but you would only know this fact when he reviews it or deliberately thinks about it.
So the destruction of the taints is a permanent, objective state of freedom, but the conscious, mental knowledge of that destruction only arises when the arahant intentionally reflects on it.
This is a massive distinction. It means the arahant is free from the fetters, but they can still be absorbed in mundane tasks or conversation or simply rest. Their freedom is fundamental, not a perpetual mental effort or some ecstatic state.
Finally, let's discuss the ultimate goal itself, cessation or nibbana. How is it described in the Majjhima Nikāya in terms of psychological mechanics?
Nibbana is described most simply as deliverance in the destruction of craving. A short teaching given to Saka, the ruler of gods, states that when a bhikkhu has heard that nothing is worth adhering to, a key principle of non-grasping, he directly knows everything.
And this full understanding leads to what kind of contemplation?
He begins to contemplate impermanence, fading away, cessation and relinquishment in all feelings. This is the integration of the insight we discussed earlier, seeing the true nature of all experience.
And the result of that contemplation is the mechanism of release.
Contemplating thus, he does not cling to anything in the world. When he does not cling, he is not agitated. When he is not agitated, he personally attains nibbana. That sequence non-clinging leads to non-agitation, which leads to nibbana is the core release mechanism taught in these texts.
The sources also detail the highest possible but temporary meditative attainment short of final nibbana, the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling.
This profound state is discussed in detail. It does not attain spontaneously. The mind has previously been developed in such a way that it leads him to that state. It requires extraordinary mental preparation and is entered intentionally.
And formations cease in a precise, observable order during this state.
Yes. First, the verbal formation ceases, all inner speech and discursive thought. Then the bodily formation, the involuntary breath. And finally, the mental formation, all perception and feeling. Upon emerging from this profound temporary cessation, the mind is said to incline, lean, and tend toward seclusion, reflecting that the mind has been conditioned to seek ultimate dispassion. It is the perfect temporary simulation of the final release.
We have certainly covered vast territory today, moving from the complex cosmological map of karma and rebirth all the way to the precise 5-step methods for psychological self-mastery and the structured stages of enlightenment.
We track the entire journey, from the cyclical misery described by dependent origination, rooted in the mistake of conceiving a self, to the rigorous deconstruction of identity through practices like the contemplation of the earth element. We've seen the path is a demanding step-by-step training of consciousness.
I think the core takeaway is the insistence on rigor and intellectual honesty. The path requires constant investigation and critical thinking, as we saw with the invitation to investigate the Buddha himself. But it also demands a ruthless self-assessment, distinguishing between the superior and inferior person based on their zeal to abandon blemishes.
And we must end by reiterating the core warning, which brings us right back to the simile of the raft. The goal is not to trade one fixed belief for another. The sources explicitly detail the profound danger of speculative views, even about the most spiritual subjects, like the nature of the Tathagata after death.
Why are these views, even if they're based on advanced speculation, considered so toxic?
Because they are universally described as a thicket of views, a wilderness of views, a contortion of views, a vacillation of views, a fetter of views. They are not harmless intellectual pursuits. They are beset by suffering, by vexation, by despair, and by fever. They do not lead to disenchantment or nibbana.
The moment you cling to a view, regardless of its accuracy, you create conflict.
Exactly. The texts emphasize that views inherently lead to conflict, disputes, quarrels, and vexation. The wise person foresees this inherent danger in rigidly adhering to any complex view, even an accurate one about the cessation of being, and abandons that view. They choose the path of direct practice and cessation over the path of mere intellectual adherence and argument.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the learner. We've seen that the ethical and meditative path requires extreme endurance and discipline, the necessity to endure the saw, the difficult confrontation with unwholesome thoughts. It sounds like psychological warfare.
Yet we have that observation recorded in the texts. King Pasenadi of Kosala once expressed profound marveling at the bhikkhus, who, despite subsisting on others' charity and leading lives of utter renunciation, were smiling and cheerful, sincerely joyful, plainly delighting, their faculties fresh, living at ease, unruffled.
If the path requires radical self-examination and such immense discipline, why does the result manifest as such apparent ease, delight, and freedom? What psychological cost is eliminated when the fetters are broken?
So we put this question to you. What part of your current knowledge or your firmest belief system, the things you argue for, defend, or cling to, is acting as a fetter of views that prevents that kind of ease and unruffled delight in your life right now? It's a question of identifying where your mental energy is still being wasted on views, on that mental proliferation, papanyaka, and on identity attachment, rather than resting in the fundamental, unshakable freedom of cessation.